am 22 weeks pregnant, and I wanted to just share a little bit of our journey, and I wanted to start making some videos just to document the journey that we are on and be able to look back on where we've been and where we are now. And so I wanted to start off by just sharing our past struggles and kind of what it's taken to get to this point of being 22 weeks with a healthy little baby boy. October 2016, we decided, my husband Caleb and I, that we wanted to start trying to have a baby. And we've been married for 4 years at that point, 4.5 years. And so we're really excited to start this new stage of life, and we were ready to grow our family. So I went off birth control, and by November 11th, we were pregnant. So it happened really fast. We were overjoyed. I remember taking the pregnancy test and seeing the positive line and just being shocked and not thinking it was real. But on December 5th, and that was actually a year ago from when I'm making this video, I started to bleed. And at first it was just really small spotting, like dark brown in color, just a tiny bit. And I didn't want to get worked up, so I didn't even call my midwife at that point. But then it didn't stop the next day, so I decided to just call and just see what they said. So I called, and they were more concerned about it than I was. They said they wanted me to come in and just do a quick ultrasound and just make sure everything's okay. So I went in that afternoon, and we hadn't been to our midwife yet. It was still really early. And they did the ultrasound, but noticed that the baby was measuring 2 weeks smaller than it was supposed to. And that was concerning, especially combined with my bleeding. So they kind of just said, but they found the heartbeat, and that was incredible to see our little baby on the ultrasound, see its heartbeat fluttering on the screen. And it was alive at that point, and so we were just really excited. But my midwife basically said, we can't rule out miscarriage because of these problems that, you know, it's measuring small, you're bleeding, we don't know why. And so basically she was just like, time will tell. I was gonna go back for an appointment the next week just to check in and see how things were going. So we went home, and we were really, really hopeful and just believed that we were gonna meet this baby and it was gonna be okay and the bleeding was gonna stop, but it didn't. And we went back in December 12th for another ultrasound and checked everything out, and miraculously we could see the heartbeat again, and the baby had grown like the right amount from our previous ultrasound to the one we were at. And so that was a really good sign, and we just really allowed ourselves to get hopeful. And our midwife did all the normal prenatal checks and like physical exam and all of that, went over our the hospital and just some of the normal pregnancy things that you talk about with your doctor. And so we both kind of came away from it really feeling like, okay, we're kind of in the clear, took a sigh of relief. But I just continued bleeding, and a couple more days went by, and I remember we were actually hosting our Christmas party for our youth group, and I just started gushing blood, like heavy blood, and it turned from just kind of a rust brown to like bright red bleeding. And I knew that this was different and something was really, really wrong. And so I called the midwife, and she said it was one of two things. Either there was a blood clot that was causing the bleeding and everything was okay, or I was miscarrying and losing the baby. And so she had me schedule an ultrasound to go in and do more of a high definition ultrasound with a technician for the next day. So I went in the next day on December 15th and did the ultrasound, and was so nervous, and it's just silent in the ultrasound room because the technicians are trained not to tell you anything that they're seeing. And so I remember just for a brief moment I was able to see the ultrasound screen and I could see the baby, but I didn't see the little flutter of the heartbeat that I'd seen on the previous ultrasounds. And in my head I was just like, I'm not going to read into it because I'm not a technician, and I just really believed that everything was going to be okay. And so she finished the ultrasound and just said, your midwife will call you in the next 4 to 6 hours with the results. And I went home. And so I got home and quickly made dinner, and Caleb and I sat down to eat, and it was just like an hour after my appointment, and my midwife called, which I was really surprised by because we weren't expecting to get the results back so soon. And she just said, I'm so sorry, but the baby no longer has a heartbeat, and we think that you are having a missed miscarriage. So the baby died probably a few days before the ultrasound, and then and my body is just starting to recognize that the baby is gone. And I remember just holding the phone by my ear and not having any words to say. Like, what do you say to that? And so I just gave the phone to my husband, and he finished talking with her, and I was just kind of stunned in silence. And as soon as he hung up the phone, we just looked at each other and crumbled into each other's arms. It was the most devastating feeling I've ever experienced, just crushing in your soul to know that this child that you already loved so much is gone, and that you're never going to get to hold them in your arms here on earth. You're never going to get to know if it was a boy or a girl, or watch your belly grow, or have that baby shower, or just all of the hopes and the dreams that you've already begun having for this child are just crushed and gone. And we just wept in each other's arms. And we decided pretty early on that we didn't want to suffer in silence, because I think miscarriage a lot of times can be a silent suffering because people don't want to share it or don't know how to share it, and it just kind of becomes this internal wound that no one else knows about, and no one else can support you in that because it's you haven't shared it. And so we just decided early on that we wanted to be open about what we were going through, so that we can be poured into and supported by our family and friends, but also so that anyone else who is going through the same thing could know that they aren't alone. So we called our family, and that was one of the hardest parts, just because no one knew that we were pregnant. We were keeping it a secret until Christmas, and 10 days shy of Christmas we miscarried, or we started the process of miscarriage. And so sharing the news in sorrow instead of joy that we had been pregnant was so hard. And then slowly we shared the news with our closest friends, and found a lot of comfort in talking about it and just being open about our story. And we found out about that we lost the baby and started the process of miscarrying the day before I went on Christmas break. So I'm a teacher as well, and so I was able to just take sick leave for that one day and then be on Christmas break for 2 weeks. And that was such a blessing to not have to worry about going to work. It's the last thing that you feel like doing. I think also I just didn't anticipate the process, because in my head I always thought miscarriage was just a one and done, like happens in a couple hours and then it's done. And for some women that might be true, but for me it was a long process. I started spotting December 5th and I didn't stop bleeding until December 27th, I think, was the first day that I was completely clear. So that is a long time. And the actual miscarriage process of like intense painful cramping and heavy bleeding lasted for about 10 to 12 days, like almost 2 weeks. And the hardest, most heart-wrenching thing was that process, because every time I went to the bathroom, it was like, there's my baby flushing down the toilet. And it's horrible. And it's just that constant reminder that your baby's gone. And so I would just say, for anyone out there who is struggling with miscarriage or is in the midst of it right now, just know that you're not alone. It is horrible. And I think people don't realize how devastating it actually is. I think people just assume that because you never saw the baby or it was never born, that it doesn't hurt as much. But believe me, it is absolutely devastating. So anyway, so we finally, I finally stopped bleeding December 27th, and we knew we wanted to try again. And so we started trying, and month after month after month after month went by with every time a negative pregnancy test. And I think that first time ruined me, because we got pregnant so fast the first time, and then it was taking so long. It felt like it was taking forever to get pregnant again. And so if you're somebody who gets pregnant super quick and easy, be grateful. But anyway, so months went by and it was just negative after negative, and I was feeling so discouraged. And finally, in the beginning of May, we got a really faint positive on one of my pregnancy tests. And it was like one of those times where you're like, okay, I think it's positive, but it's just super light. And so we were like, okay, well, we'll wait and test again. So I tested for like 5 days, and every day the line was getting a little bit darker, and finally got to a point where like it was clearly positive. And so I was finally letting myself get hopeful and excited, like, oh my gosh, I am pregnant. Like, I am pregnant again. This is amazing. And my period was late and all of those things. And so we were finally like starting to get excited. And literally the next day, I started bleeding. And it was definitely more intense than just your normal period. Like, the cramps were awful, very similar to the cramping I had with my first miscarriage, and just super heavy bleeding. So I called my midwife again and just told her kind of what I had experienced with the positive tests and then now this bleeding. And she basically told me that in the medical field they call it a chemical pregnancy, which basically means it's just a really early miscarriage. And so I again was just like, are you kidding me again? And the second time I was really angry. I just felt angry at God. I didn't understand why this was happening again. We finally had this glimmer of hope, and then it was just snatched away like that. And I was angry. I was really so tired of being disappointed. And every time I was met with grace and comfort and peace from God. And I'm so grateful for that. And I just cannot imagine going through the devastation of miscarriage and pregnancy loss without my faith and without the comfort of his presence, and knowing that there's a purpose for my pain, and that it's not all for nothing, that these babies that I've lost, they didn't die for nothing, but their lives can have a purpose in my life and in other people's lives. So that really helped us to kind of get through and process all of that. But so that's kind of the journey that we've been on. And so then after that in May, it still took, like, June went by and still nothing. And then in July, towards the end of the month, we were getting ready to go to youth camp with our students. And I started feeling symptoms, just like felt like really tender, and was feeling kind of nauseous and extra tired and some of those different things. But again, I was like, I felt those before and it has been nothing. And so I didn't want to get my hopes up. But the day before we left for camp, I took a pregnancy test because my period hadn't come and it was negative. And so I was like, okay, so I'm like most likely not pregnant, and we'll just see if I get my period while we're at camp. And day after day, it didn't come. And more, I was just feeling this feeling like, I think I'm pregnant. But like, we were at camp with a bunch of teenagers, and so it was like, I didn't bring any pregnancy tests with me. So I just kind of tried not to think about it too much. And so then we got back Friday, and it was July 28th. We got back and I got home a little bit before Caleb and just was like, I need to know. So I went straight to the bathroom and took a pregnancy test, and within like 2 seconds, the positive line shows up. And I just crumbled onto the floor, sobbing, and just over and over and over, I just kept saying, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. And just sobbing, like, thank you, Jesus, laying on the floor of our bathroom, weeping over this pregnancy test. So we did not wait to tell anyone, really, this time around. So it was actually really incredible. The day we found out we were pregnant, the next day, July 29th, was the due date of our first baby. How cool is that? Like, God's timing is incredible. And so we had already planned to have my family come down and visit, just because we knew it was going to be a hard day and wanted to have something fun planned with family to just make that day a little bit easier. So my whole family was already coming down to visit, and we had just found out we were pregnant. It was just incredible that this day that we were dreading, our due date of our first baby, a day that was going to be so hard and so sad, ended up being this incredible celebration of this new life that was growing inside of me. And I just look at that and I can't help but know that that was God, that this whole pregnancy has been redemption for us in this season. And so we told my family that day and told Caleb's family and started telling our close friends. And we ended up going into our doctor for our first appointment around 8 weeks. So I think it was like end of August or something. And they were doing the ultrasound and noticed that the baby was smaller than it should have been at that point. And so, like, we thought we were 8.5 weeks and the baby was measuring 6.5 weeks. And instantly, Caleb and I both were just like, are you kidding me? Like, we're gonna lose another baby. Because that's how our first ultrasound went with our first baby. But I wasn't bleeding. I hadn't had any signs of miscarriage except for that the baby was measuring small. And so, but we both still were just like automatically in that headspace of, this is bad, we're gonna lose the baby, all of that. I started like researching like what could be wrong and things like that, and everybody was like, oh, like your dates could be off, you could have ovulated late, all these things. And I was like, oh, okay, I don't need to panic and freak out right now. And so Caleb and I both, like, after we talked to people and kind of prayed about it, we both felt a lot more peace, and we're just like, this is not the end. And so we went back in 2 weeks later, and the baby had grown exactly how it should have, and everything looked perfect. And it was the first time that we'd ever had a doctor's appointment where everything was good. And so we left that appointment on cloud 9. We were so over the moon, happy, and just like, oh, this is what it feels like to have a healthy, normal pregnancy. And it just like really started to feel real from that point on, because it was like, okay, now we can really let ourselves be happy. And so a couple weeks later, we announced that we were pregnant publicly, and just started really enjoying this whole journey. I've been super nauseous and sick, which has been a blessing in disguise, because it's just that reminder that my hormones are raging and things are going how they're supposed to. And even though it's really uncomfortable and can be debilitating sometimes, it is good. And I would take morning sickness, well, it's not morning sickness, it's all day sickness, but I would take nausea and throwing up over an empty womb any day of the week. So I am like, whatever, I'll take it. Otherwise, it's been a perfectly healthy, amazing pregnancy, and we're now 22 weeks. We found out right before Thanksgiving that we're having a little boy, and we are so excited. And yeah, this season specifically, you know, it was a year ago that I started bleeding, and this whole journey began with pregnancy loss and miscarriage. And so I really just have felt like it's time for us to not only continue sharing our story, but to document this process, because I want to be able to look back and watch how I felt, how I looked, what it was like throughout this process of having this little boy and our rainbow baby. So we're just so excited. And you know, as we go into this Christmas season, there is a lot of pain. You know, it's the anniversary of our miscarriage, and it's hard to kind of relive some of those things. But at the same time, knowing where we are this year, that we're pregnant with this healthy little boy, and like, again, it's so like God that on the 1 year anniversary of our miscarriage, we are completely healthy and pregnant with a little boy that we are so excited to meet. And that's just amazing. So we're so grateful for that, and so grateful for all the support that we've had from our friends and family, and even just random strangers who have heard our story and been so encouraging and have found healing and hope in our story. And I just hope and pray that God can use our story for good, and we're just looking forward to what is in store for us. Our lives are going to change so much in the next like couple of months. It's crazy. So anyways, I don't want to go too long, so I just wanted to end with a little belly shot of my bump, and yeah, and then be looking for future videos and updates on this pregnancy and just our continued journey through pregnancy after loss.